Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of absolute precision.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, it is basically like engineering. You break your arm, you go to the hospital, and they take an X-ray.
Right, and it's totally binary.
Exactly. The X-ray just shows that jagged white line right across the bone, and the doctor points at the illuminated screen and says, well, there it is.
Broken or not broken, it is a clean line of sight into the problem.
Yeah, and honestly, that is super comforting. Like, human beings just love things to be visible and quantifiable.
Oh, we love putting things in neat little boxes. It makes us feel like we actually have control over the mechanics of the world.
Right, but then you step into the world of the American criminal justice system, and suddenly that X-ray machine is just completely shattered.
Shattered is the perfect word for it. It is diagnostic muddy waters.
Seriously, we are looking at this landscape of guilt and innocence that is incredibly murky. I mean, we all assume the system is just scanning for facts, right? Like, did you do it or did you not do it?
That is the assumption, yeah.
But the source material we are unpacking on the deep dive today suggests the machine is scanning for something else entirely.
It really does. And the document we are diving into it is this dense, highly provocative legal and constitutional essay called equalprotection.pdf.
Yeah.
And it argues that the machine is not broken by accident. It is actually functioning exactly as its underlying architecture dictates.
Right. And we should clarify, this is not just one author operating in some philosophical vacuum here.
No, not at all.
We are talking about a massive structural critique, and it is backed by a mountain of data. We have got research from the Vera Institute of Justice, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the Brennan Center, the American Bar Association, and just a whole slew of Supreme Court rulings.
How much data?
Yeah. So here is the mission for today. Here is the core premise we are going to explore.
Well,
America loves to say that justice is blind, right?
that is the famous saying.
But this text argues that the criminal process actually sees absolutely everything.
Everything except, perhaps, the isolated facts of the case itself.
Right. It sees your wealth. It sees your zip code.
It sees the political climate of your specific county.
Exactly. It sees the budget of the local public defender's office. It sees your past mistakes. And it processes all of that machinery before it ever even glances at the actual facts of what happened on, a random Tuesday night.
So we are going straight into a radical reframing of what the 14th Amendment actually means when it guarantees equal protection.
It is going to be wild. And just to give you listening a little blueprint of where we are heading, we are going to start downstream.
Right in the thick of the local county courthouse.
Exactly. We will look at the prosecutors, the local holding cells, the public defenders, the judges. But then, and this is the crazy part, we're going to trace the origins of this inequality all the way upstream.
Upstream to the very top.
Yeah. We are going to connect the mechanics of a local plea deal to the United States Constitution, the 17th Amendment, and the actual architecture of how laws are made in the U.S. Senate.
Now, before we jump into the deep end here, we really need to pause and be incredibly clear about something.
Yes, very important disclaimer time.
The source material we are mapping out today contains heavily politically charged critiques. It critiques both the American criminal justice system and the United States Constitution itself.
Yeah, it pulls no punches. These arguments aggressively challenge established legal doctrines, Supreme Court precedent, and modern democratic norms.
Right. And so it is vital for you listening to understand that our purpose today is absolutely not to endorse these viewpoints.
We are not taking any political sides here. Left, right, center. We're completely neutral.
Exactly. Our job is just to impartially unpack, map out, and analyze the complex mechanics of the arguments presented in this text.
We are basically your tour guides through this architecture of thought. You get to decide what you actually think about it.
So to start mapping this out, we have to look at the bedrock, which is the 14th Amendment.
Right. The text commands that no state may deny any person equal protection of the laws.
And the author's primary argument is that the American legal system has made a catastrophic error in how it interprets that one specific sentence.
How so?
Well, the author says the system constantly confuses minimum representation with equal protection.
Okay, that feels like a crucial distinction. Let's get into the mechanics of that.
Basically, the system treats a completed docket like the actual physical or digital paperwork of the court as absolute proof that justice occurred.
So if the paper says counsel present,
Or if it says plea entered voluntarily, the system looks at that procedural skeleton and goes, well, look, we checked the boxes, we achieved equal protection.
okay, let's unpack this mechanically with an analogy. Imagine a massive car assembly line.
I love a good car analogy.
Right. So you are building this car, but the brakes are defective, the steering column is cracked, and the tires are completely bald.
Sounds like a death trap.
It totally is. But at the very end of the line, a state inspector walks up with a clipboard. They see that the car technically has 4 wheels and a steering wheel, and they just slap a big, shiny past inspection sticker right on the windshield.
And the system views that sticker as the undeniable reality of the car.
Exactly. But having the sticker on the windshield does not actually make the car safe to drive at 60 miles an hour on the highway.
Not at all.
A completed docket is just the sticker. It records the procedural skeleton, but it entirely fails to record the immense, unseen pressure that actually shaped the outcome of the case.
And this brings us to the core of what the author calls the whole machine principle.
The whole machine principle. I like that phrasing.
It is super accurate. If we look closely at how a defendant experiences the justice system, they do not just face one official in a vacuum.
Right. They're not just talking to one person.
No, they do not have a perfectly isolated conversation with a judge and then a perfectly isolated conversation with a prosecutor. They face the state, capital S, as a unified, overwhelmingly powerful machine.
But wait, the machine does not act like it is unified, does it? I mean, it feels incredibly fragmented when you look at it from the outside.
Oh, absolutely. And that fragmentation is the brilliance of the system's design, according to this critique.
What do you mean by brilliance?
Well, think about how responsibility is divided up to avoid accountability.
Oh, I see.
Like, the state legislature passes a remarkably harsh mandatory minimum sentence, but when they are questioned about it, they say, hey, we just wrote the statute. We do not apply it to specific people.
Right. They pass the buck.
Exactly. Then the prosecutor uses that harsh law to stack charges against a specific person. But the prosecutor says, well, I am just applying the law the legislature wrote. My hands are tied.
And then the judge sets a cash bond that the defendant has no physical way of paying.
And the judge says, hey, I do not fund the public defender's office, and I do not run the jail. I am just assessing flight risk.
Wow. And then the local sheriff runs the jail where the person is held in these overcrowded, traumatizing conditions. But the sheriff just says, we just house the bodies the court sends us. We do not set the bond amounts.
You nailed it. Every single office, every single official just points a finger at someone else in the bureaucratic chain.
They divide themselves into pieces to basically dodge the moral and constitutional weight of what is happening.
Exactly. But the accused person, the human being at the center of this, they do not experience these offices separately. They experience the crushing weight of the entire chain simultaneously.
That is heavy.
It really is. If every office contributes just one unequal piece, like underfunding here, harsh charging there, political pressure over there, the final result for the person is a profound denial of equal protection.
So equal protection basically has to mean the whole defensive architecture protects equally, or else the phrase just becomes this administrative fiction.
It just becomes paperwork that legally sanitizes the brutal reality of the machine.
Okay, so we have established this whole machine principle. Let's actually walk through the first gears of that machine.
Let's do it.
Let's look at where the inequality first enters the bloodstream of a criminal case. We're talking about the prosecutor's office and the local jail, the pretrial pressure cooker.
The text leans heavily on empirical data from the Vera Institute of Justice here to talk about prosecutorial discretion.
Right.
And we really need to understand the mechanics of this discretion because it completely subverts how the general public thinks the law actually works.
Yeah, I think the general public imagines the criminal code is kind of like a vending machine.
A vending machine.
Yeah, like you put in the specific conduct, say you stole a television,
Yeah.
and you press the button, and the charge of theft of a television just automatically pops out. It's supposed to be math.
Right. Input equals output. But Vera's research shows that charging and plea decisions are highly subjective, heavily weaponized pivotal points.
Weaponized.
Oh, absolutely. They shape the entire outcome long before a trial ever even happens. Prosecutors get to choose from this vast, overlapping menu of statutes.
They can choose to add enhancements, right?
Yes, they can add enhancements, they can stack multiple counts for a single event, they can offer dismissals, they can amend charges to completely different categories.
The text actually uses a terrifying phrase for this. It calls it charge stacking. And it says this creates what they call a sentencing cliff. Let's break down how that actually works in practice.
Okay, so a sentencing cliff is basically a psychological and legal mechanism.
Okay.
It happens when a prosecutor piles on so many overlapping counts or threatens so many statutory enhancements that the potential punishment, if you lose at trial, becomes astronomical.
Like what, 40 years?
Yeah, 40 years, compared to a plea offer of, say, 2 years.
Wait, I'm getting stuck here for a second. If the prosecutor has the evidence for all those charges, isn't that just the law functioning properly? How is that unequal?
Because the application of that cliff is entirely discretionary.
Ah.
If one person's facts are charged as this harsh, unyielding hammer designed to terrify them into taking a plea, and another person with identical facts gets their case charged as a mild starting point for negotiation, well, equal protection is already completely gone.
Right. The law is no longer a standard rule.
Mm,
It has become a lever.
exactly. And the Supreme Court has explicitly blessed this lever.
Yes, the text dives into a really specific case here, Bordenkircher v. Hayes. We have to tell the story of this case because it perfectly illustrates the mechanics of the pressure cooker.
Paul Hayes is the absolute textbook example of this dynamic.
So back in the 1970s, Paul Hayes was accused of forging a check, and the check was for $88.30.
Less than $90.
Right. Now, he had a couple of prior felony convictions, but nothing violent. The prosecutor offers him a deal. They say, plead guilty to the forgery, and we will recommend a 5-year sentence.
Which is already a lot for an $80 check.
Totally.
Wow.
But the prosecutor says, if you refuse the deal and demand your constitutional right to a trial, I'm going to go back to the grand jury and indict you under the state's Habitual Criminal Act.
And the mandatory penalty under that specific act was life in prison.
Over an $88 check. The prosecutor explicitly said, take 5 years or exercise your right to trial, and I will legally ensure you die in prison.
It is staggering.
So Hayes refused the plea. He actually went to trial. He was convicted, and he was sentenced to life.
And when this whole thing went to the Supreme Court, the court essentially ruled that this kind of threat during plea negotiations is constitutionally permissible.
They said it was fine.
Yes,
Yeah.
they considered it part of the acceptable give and take of bargaining.
Unbelievable.
The court's rationale was that as long as the defendant is technically free to accept or reject the offer, there is no unconstitutional coercion happening.
But the author of our text looks at the mechanics of that and just completely rejects it. I mean, if the state can legally use the threat of a life sentence as a literal battering ram to force a plea for a 5-year sentence and then call the defendant's surrender voluntary, we are not testing facts anymore. We are doing survival bargaining.
Survival bargaining. That is exactly what the author means by the trial penalty.
Right.
We are taught from grade school that everyone has a fundamental constitutional right to a trial by a jury of their peers, but the system mathematically punishes the exercise of that right.
The plea bargain just becomes the baseline discount.
And exercising your constitutional right becomes this massive, terrifying risk of exponential punishment.
And that risk is magnified 100 times if you are trying to make that decision while sitting inside a literal cage.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's talk about the bail system now. The text is brutal here. It calls the cash bond system protection for sale.
Let's look at the hard data on this. The Bureau of Justice Statistics reported that at mid-year 2024, 69% of the local jail population in the United States was unconvicted.
Just pause on that for a second.
Yes.
69%.
Nearly 7 out of 10 human beings.
7 out of 10 people sitting in local county jails have not been convicted of the current charge they are facing. They are legally innocent.
They are legally innocent, and they are only there because they do not have the liquidity, like the literal cash on hand, to buy their way out of the cell.
Let's walk through what this actually means mechanically for a case.
Okay, let's do a scenario.
Let's say you and I are both arrested for the exact same crime. The judge sets bail at $5,000.
Okay.
You have the money. I do not. You post bond.
Yeah.
You go home. You sleep in your own bed.
Right.
You eat your own food. You go to work the next day so you do not lose your job.
All crucial things.
And more importantly, legally speaking, you can sit in your kitchen table with your lawyer. You can review dense police reports, you can track down witnesses, and you can actively participate in building your own defense with a clear head.
And what happens to you, the person who could not pay the $5,000?
I stay in the cage. And within 72 hours, I'll probably lose my job because I did not show up for my shifts.
All right, they just fire you.
And if I lose my job, I might miss rent and lose my apartment. My family is totally destabilized. I am surrounded by chaos, noise, and the constant threat of violence. My physical and mental health just starts to rapidly erode.
The author uses a phrase here that is central to this entire critique. They say, The cage changes the case.
The cage changes the case.
Yes. The physical environment of a local jail acts as an active legal pressure tactic.
It is wild to think about a concrete room as a legal mechanism, but that is exactly what it is.
And this is not just sociological theory either. The text points to rigorous empirical research published through the American Economic Review and the National Bureau of Economic Research.
What did the data show?
The data proves that pretrial detention significantly increases the probability of conviction.
But wait, how exactly does it increase that probability? It is not because detained people are inherently guiltier, right?
Not at all. It increases the probability of conviction primarily through a massive increase in guilty pleas. People who are detained pre-trial are vastly more likely to plead guilty than people who are free, simply to get out of the immediate pain of the local holding facility.
So it is just desperation.
Total desperation. If a prosecutor offers a deal that says, hey, plead guilty and we will credit you for time served and let you out today, a person who is terrified of losing their housing and their children will take that plea regardless of factual guilt.
They just want to go home.
Exactly.
So if we synthesize what the author is really saying here, if your freedom before trial depends entirely on your bank account, then poverty itself becomes a punishment before conviction.
It completely shatters the illusion of equal protection.
You literally have two people facing the exact same statute, but experiencing two entirely different legal realities based purely on wealth.
Okay, so let's move to the next gear in the machine.
Let's do it.
So a defendant has navigated the prosecutorial pressure, and they are either fighting from their living room or they're fighting from a cell. Next, they meet the people who are supposedly designed to ensure fairness in the system, the defense lawyer and the judge.
The shield, that is what they call it.
Yes, the constitutional shield. But the question the text asks is, do these figures actually equalize the machine, or do they just become another part of it?
That is a great question.
Let's start with defense counsel. We all know the famous case, Gideon v. Wainwright.
Oh, yeah. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Clarence Earl Gideon literally writing his petition to the Supreme Court in pencil from a Florida prison.
It is an amazing story.
It is the bedrock of modern criminal justice on paper.
And later, the Supreme Court added a necessary layer to that in a case called Strickland v. Washington. They established that this provided counsel must be effective.
Right. It cannot just be a warm body in a suit sleeping at the defense table.
Exactly. But the text draws a massive critical distinction between the theoretical right to counsel and the mechanical delivery of that counsel.
The delivery is where it breaks down. The author writes, private defense is a market. Public defense is a budget.
Yes.
Now, I want to push back on this for a second because when I first read this, I wondered if the author is just attacking public defenders. Are they saying public defenders are bad lawyers?
I am really glad you brought that up because the author anticipates that exact reaction. They provide a very explicit caveat in the text.
Okay, what is the caveat?
They state clearly that this is absolutely not an attack on the individuals doing the work of public defense. In fact, the text acknowledges that many public defenders are brilliant, deeply committed, and practically speaking, they are often far more experienced in front of a jury than many expensive private attorneys.
Okay, so if the lawyers themselves are actually good, what is the mechanical failure then?
The failure is purely structural. The text points to the American Bar Association's National Public Defense Workload Study.
Oh, the caseload numbers.
Yes. Let's talk about what an impossible caseload actually means in reality. If a brilliant, dedicated public defender is assigned 400 felony cases a year, the math simply breaks.
400 felonies?
Yes. There are literally not enough hours in a working year to review body camera footage, file substantive pretrial motions, interview witnesses, and actually sit down with the client to explain complex legal strategy.
Right. If you only have, like, 2 hours total to devote to a client's entire life-altering case, you are not really lawyering at that point. You are just processing them through the machine.
Exactly. You're a cog. So a wealthy defendant treats defense as a free market. They do not just buy a lawyer, they buy an entire army.
Right. They get the lead counsel, the associate attorneys to do all the heavy research.
They get private investigators to track down exculpatory evidence.
Forensic experts to challenge the state's science. Mitigation specialists.
And most importantly, they buy time.
Time.
Yeah.
while the poor defendant receives exactly what the county budget allows, which is often a mathematically impossible fraction of a single attorney's time.
And here is where the text points out a massive contradiction in current Supreme Court doctrine.
What is this contradiction?
The doctrine explicitly permits this massive disparity. The law says that wealthy defendants have a fundamental right to use their lawful resources to retain counsel of their choice and build the best defense money can buy.
Which, on its face, that sounds like basic American freedom.
It's-
You have money, you should be able to spend it to save your own life.
Sure, but look at the mechanical consequence of that logic. If we admit that having an elite legal team, experts, and investigators is essential to securing a favorable outcome,
Which we do admit.
right, and we legally protect the right of the wealthy to buy infinitely more of that protection, then we are structurally admitting that fairness itself scales with wealth.
Wow. You're basically saying fairness is a luxury good.
The Supreme Court doctrine essentially says that equal protection does not require absolute equality. It only requires a minimum baseline of adequacy.
But the author views this as a profound constitutional failure,
Sure.
right?
Absolutely. The author asks, why is it legally acceptable that wealth buys premium constitutional protection while poverty guarantees the absolute minimum protection the courts will tolerate before conviction just gets overturned?
It totally reduces the 14th Amendment to a price tag.
It really does. And, the lawyer is only one part of the courtroom ecosystem. We also have to look at the person wearing the robe.
The judge.
Yes. We have this deep cultural mythology of judges as these stoic, completely neutral arbiters of the law.
Right, like they are floating above the messy reality of human bias, just calling balls and strikes.
But judges are human beings, and mechanically speaking, in many states across the country, they are elected officials.
They have to run campaigns.
They operate inside highly volatile political ecosystems. The text cites the Brennan Center for Justice here. They have done extensive research tying judicial re-election pressures directly to harsher criminal sentencing.
Let's look at how that actually works on the ground. Let's say you are a judge in a county where the local newspaper, the police unions, and the political action committees will run vicious attack ads calling you soft on crime if you give a lenient sentence to a controversial defendant.
Or if you set a low bail for someone who later commits a crime while they are released, that is a classic attack ad.
Right. That political reality fundamentally changes the psychological environment of the courtroom.
It has to.
If a judge knows that showing mercy, or even just adhering strictly to the presumption of innocence, might cost them their entire career, well, the defendant is no longer just a person facing the law.
What do they become?
The defendant becomes political material.
That is a chilling way to put it.
A judge might not consciously wake up and intend to be unfair, but if they are situated in an environment that heavily rewards severity and actively punishes mercy with electoral defeat, equal protection is deeply compromised by the invisible hand of the political climate.
And the text also touches on the literal invisible bureaucracy of the court, the clerks.
Oh, this part blew my mind.
It is so mundane, but so destructive.
Right, the people who control the paper trail. Just accessing the record of your own case, like getting the transcripts you need to file an appeal, or navigating the fee schedules.
If you are wealthy, your legal team's paralegals just handle it. It is invisible to you.
But if you are poor, even knowing what form to ask for, or being able to afford the $2 a page copy fee for a massive trial transcript, that becomes an insurmountable physical barrier to justice.
The system literally charges you for the paperwork required to prove the system failed you.
That is just bleak. So if we look at the downstream machine we have built so far, the prosecutor uses the threat of massive charges to force a plea.
Yep.
The jail uses the physical trauma of detention to pressure a plea. The public defense system is structurally underfunded, so it cannot fight back effectively.
The elected judge is pressured by local politics to be harsh.
And the clerks lock the appeal process behind fees and procedural mazes.
It is a machine perfectly designed to process human beings, not protect them.
Okay, so we have talked about how wealth, the local jail, and politics trap someone in the present moment. But what happens when the machine uses your past against you?
Ah, yes.
Let's look at how prior records warp the machine.
This is where the text tackles the mechanics of recidivist sentencing. We are talking about things like habitual offender statutes, 3 strikes laws, and prior conviction enhancements.
And current legal doctrine heavily supports this,
Oh,
right?
completely. The Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed that it is perfectly legal to use a person's prior convictions to enhance the sentence of their current charge.
The text mentions a string of cases here. Armendariz Torres, Ewing v. California, Apprendi, and Erlinger.
Let's break a couple of those down so we really understand the mechanics of what we were talking about.
Well,
Take Ewing v. California.
okay.
Gary Ewing walked into a price shop and stole 3 golf clubs. They were worth about $1,200 total.
Okay, so a standard felony theft.
Normally, yes. Maybe a couple of years in prison, depending on the exact statute in that state. But Ewing had a prior criminal record. He had previously been convicted of serious felonies.
Okay.
And under California's 3 strikes law at the time, because he had those prior strikes, the theft of the 3 golf clubs triggered a massive enhancement.
Oh, massive.
Ewing was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
For 3 golf clubs.
Do 3 golf clubs.
He appealed that, obviously. He said 25 to life for stealing golf clubs violates the 8th Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment because it is just grossly disproportionate.
But the Supreme Court upheld the sentence. They argued that the state is totally justified in incapacitating repeat offenders. They said the sentence is not just for the golf clubs, it is for the entirety of his recidivist behavior over his lifetime.
Wow. And then there is Apprendi v. New Jersey, which is fascinating mechanically.
Yes, Apprendi is huge.
The general rule in Apprendi is that any fact that increases the penalty for a crime beyond the prescribed statutory maximum must be submitted to a jury and proved beyond a reasonable doubt.
Which sounds like a great protection, but there is a glaring, highly specific carve-out in that rule.
What is the exception?
The exception is the fact of a prior conviction. The Supreme Court essentially says that because a prior conviction was already adjudicated in the past, a judge can just look at the piece of paper and use it to double or triple your current sentence without making a new jury look at it.
But the author completely rejects this entire foundation of logic.
They do. They propose something incredibly radical instead. They call it the first offense equality rule.
The first offense equality rule.
Yes. They argue that every single new charge must be processed exactly as if it were a first offense when it comes to the statutory range and the trial exposure.
Now, I know what you were thinking, and I have to imagine the listener is thinking the exact same thing right now.
Yeah, we have to address the elephant in the room.
I have to jump in and play devil's advocate here, because this feels deeply counterintuitive to how we think about justice. Wait, I'm getting stuck here. If I break the law a second time, it seems perfectly logical to me that I should be punished harder, because I clearly did not learn my lesson the first time.
Right, that is the standard view.
Doesn't public safety matter? How does the author mathematically or morally justify just ignoring my past?
The author totally anticipates that exact pushback. They acknowledge that public safety is the state's primary concern, but they break down the counterargument by drawing a very sharp line between prosecuting the act and enhancing the person.
Walk me through that. Act versus person.
The author says the state is absolutely allowed to prosecute the physical act you committed today, but it should not use your past to enhance the person.
Okay.
When you use a prior record to increase the statutory range of a new charge, like jumping from a 5-year maximum to a 20-year maximum just because of a past conviction, you are no longer just judging the present fact.
You're judging the whole history.
The state has essentially created 2 different versions of the exact same law. A mild version for a person without a record, and a devastating version for a person with a record.
Okay, I think I get it. So, if you and I both get caught stealing a bicycle today, we committed the exact same physical act.
Right.
We caused the exact same harm to society. But if I have a prior record from 5 years ago, the state charges you with a misdemeanor, but uses my record to charge me with a felony enhancement.
Exactly. The text argues this turns a prior record into a legal caste marker.
A caste marker.
Yes. The law is no longer just asking what happened this time. It is asking who has the state already labeled this person to be. You are being adjudicated through your social and legal status, not just your present actions.
That completely flips the script.
Yeah.
But again, the standard pushback from society is going to be, well, you earned that negative status by committing the past crimes. You generated the prior record.
And here is where the author drops the absolute hammer with the concept of the record multiplier.
This is where it all comes together.
Let's connect this right back to what we just talked about 20 minutes ago. We just detailed how the downstream machinery, the cash bail, the public defender underfunding, the prosecutorial leverage of charge stacking produces a profound lack of equal protection.
Right. It forces pleas.
So, what if your prior record is simply the product of that unequal machine?
Oh, wow. I see exactly where this is going.
What if your very first conviction 5 years ago was not because you were undeniably factually guilty of everything the state claimed.
What if you got that conviction because you couldn't afford a $500 bail?
Or your public defender had 400 cases and spoke to you for exactly 5 minutes.
And the prosecutor threatened you with 20 years if you didn't take a 2-year plea deal.
Exactly. You took the plea just to survive the pressure cooker, and now because of that, you have a permanent felony record.
And now 5 years later, you get arrested again. And the state points to that first record, a record they literally manufactured through unequal pressure. And they use it as undeniable proof of your criminality today.
They use it to justify enhancing your new charge, denying you bail this time around, and threatening you with even more time.
That is a terrifying loop. The state processes a person unequally, and then later points to the result of that unequal process as the moral and legal justification to process them even more harshly the next time.
It is inequality literally compounding itself through the mechanics of the law.
The author explicitly says, responsibility and unequal justice can both be true at the same time.
That is such a crucial sentence.
A person can have made bad choices, they can be guilty of an act, but the system's favorite trick is to treat a piece of paper, the prior record, as the absolute end of the conversation.
But the text asks us to treat it as the beginning of the question. How is this specific record actually produced?
It demands we stop treating a piece of paper as unquestionable truth when we know the machinery that printed the paper is deeply flawed.
Okay. If you are listening to this and feeling a bit of whiplash right now, you are definitely not alone.
Yeah, take a breath because we're about to make a huge jump.
Because right here in the text, the author executes a massive, highly provocative pivot. Up to this point, we have analyzed the downstream machinery. We have been deep in the weeds of the county courthouse, the jail cells, the plea deals, and the prior records.
But the author suddenly zooms out. I mean, way out. We go from critiquing the concrete floor of the local county jail to suddenly debating the original architecture of the United States Constitution.
And how we elect U.S. senators.
When I first read this part, I thought, how on earth does a critique of plea bargaining become a debate about the 17th Amendment?
It feels disconnected at first. But let's look at why the author forces us to make this jump. It all comes down to one foundational question. Who builds the machine?
The lawmakers build the machine.
Exactly. Before the prosecutor ever makes a charging decision, before the judge ever sets a bond amount, the law itself has already been written. The funding mechanisms have already been allocated. The structural power has already been distributed. If the lawmaking structure itself is captured or structurally distorted upstream, then every single downstream criminal law is infected by that same inequality.
So equal protection actually has to start at the constitutional source. The law itself must be equally protected from manipulation before it can possibly protect the people on the ground.
So the text takes us all the way back to the original framing of the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 3. Originally, how were United States senators actually chosen?
They were chosen by the state legislatures. They were not elected by a popular vote of the citizens.
Right.
Like the state legislature in, say, Ohio would convene, and they would pick the 2 senators to send to Washington.
The text describes the Senate in this original design as the gate through which the state, as an institutional functioning government, participated in federal power.
And the author does this incredibly deep, almost microscopic reading of Article 1, Section 3, Clause 3. It is the clause about the qualifications to be a senator. You have to be 30 years old, 9 years a citizen of the United States. And here is the key phrase the author fixates on. Who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen.
Now, most legal scholars and casual readers look at that as just a simple geographic checklist. You have to live in the state you represent.
Sure.
But the author argues that the exact phrasing, specifically the distinction between citizen of the United States and inhabitant of that state, is deliberate, profound constitutional architecture.
I want to try an analogy here to see if I am grasping the mechanics of this.
Let's hear it.
It is like the difference between being a local franchise manager and a corporate board member.
Yeah.
The state legislature is essentially saying, you are not working for the local Ohio branch anymore. You are going to Washington to sit on the board on behalf of Ohio, but you are a federal executive now.
That is a perfect mechanical analogy. The text argues that when the person is elected by the legislature, they cross a threshold. They are no longer a local state officer. They become a federal officer, a United States senator.
The constitutional phrasing is chosen FOR that state, not owned by that state.
The author is obsessed with this distinction. The senator is chosen for the state, but they do not carry state inhabitancy into Washington as their controlling identity. They are a federal officer.
And this is crucial for accountability, right?
Absolutely. If a senator is corrupt, that corruption concerns the federal office. They cannot hide behind the state's sovereign immunity.
So we have this original structure. The state legislature is the institutional gatekeeper, picking federal board members. But then we get to the 17th Amendment. What happened when the 17th Amendment moved Senate selection away from the legislatures and gave it to a direct popular vote in 1913?
To understand the mechanics of this massive change, we have to look at the official history, which you can find in the National Archives and the U.S. Senate's own historical records.
What was the environment like back then?
Well, the 17th Amendment was championed as a massive reform measure. It was passed to stop deadlocks and blatant systemic corruption in state legislatures.
The text mentions the Lorimer bribery scandal here. Let's take a minute to tell that story, because it perfectly explains the environment of 1909.
William Lorimer.
Yeah. William Lorimer was this massive political boss in Chicago. In 1909, the Illinois state legislature was deadlocked for months trying to pick a U.S. senator. Finally, Lorimer magically gets the vote.
Magically, right?
But then, a newspaper breaks the story that Lorimer literally had allies handing out envelopes of cash, thousands of dollars, to state legislators to buy their votes.
It was direct, undeniable structural vote buying. The scandal was so blatantly corrupt that the U.S. Senate eventually invalidated his election entirely.
Wow.
And the public outrage over Lorimer became a massive tipping point for the 17th Amendment. The reformers said, let's take the power away from these corrupt state politicians in smoke-filled rooms and give the power directly to the people through a popular vote.
Which, on its surface, that sounds like an absolute win for democracy. More voices, less corruption.
But the author of our text argues this did not just change a simple election procedure. It was a fundamental structural shift in the architecture of the republic.
How so?
It moved the gate of federal power out of an institutional body, the legislature, and dropped it squarely into the campaign marketplace.
And what rules govern a mass statewide campaign marketplace?
Money, mass persuasion, and new kind of structural vote buying.
The author makes a very careful distinction here. Direct vote buying, like handing a voter a $100 bill in exchange for their ballot, is highly illegal.
Right, you cannot do that.
But the author says that modern campaign finance allows you to legally buy the atmosphere around the voter's mind.
The text points to massive Supreme Court decisions like Buckley v. Vallejo and Citizens United v. FEC.
Let's explain the mechanics of those rulings.
Essentially, the Supreme Court established that spending money to communicate political ideas is a form of protected speech under the First Amendment. Therefore, the government cannot strictly limit independent expenditures by corporations or wealthy individuals.
Let me try another analogy here. This one is like a rigged sporting event. Imagine a football game.
Okay.
It is strictly, undeniably illegal to hand the referee an envelope of cash right before kickoff to blow the whistle in your favor. That is direct bribery. That is William Lorimer.
Right.
But under current campaign finance rules, the text suggests it is perfectly legal for billionaires to buy the television networks that the referee watches every single night.
I see.
They can run constant, targeted ads telling the referee that one team is evil and the other is virtuous. They can buy the billboards along the referee's commute to the stadium, and they can hire consultants to whisper in the referee's ear constantly.
So you are not buying the physical hand that throws the penalty flag. You are buying the ecosystem of the mind that decides when to throw it.
Exactly. You are buying the atmosphere. And the author argues that by subjecting the U.S. Senate to this mass campaign marketplace, senators become what the author calls state-inhabited.
Remember that distinction from Article 1? The senator is supposed to be a federal officer chosen for the state?
Yes.
But the author argues that in the campaign marketplace, they go to Washington as the captured products of state-level donor networks, media branding, and massive party machinery. They are literally inhabited by the campaign machine that spent $80 million to get them elected.
And we must reiterate our impartiality rule here for the listener.
Yes, very important.
This is a highly unorthodox, deeply critical view of modern American democracy. Defining democratic elections as a campaign marketplace that captures lawmakers is a massive theoretical leap. We are mapping the author's architectural argument, not stating it as absolute fact.
Yes, a very important caveat. But the internal logic of the author's argument is clear. If the U.S. Senate, the body that confirms every federal judge, passes federal criminal statutes, and allocates Justice Department funding is fundamentally captured by the financial pressures of the campaign marketplace, then the laws they write are fundamentally distorted.
The unequal protection does not start down in the courtroom with the public defender's budget. It starts upstream at the ballot box, when the atmosphere of the mind is bought and paid for.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most explosive piece of this constitutional puzzle.
Buckle up.
If the 17th Amendment fundamentally altered the architecture of the Senate and exposed it to this mass campaign capture, was the 17th Amendment even a valid use of the Constitution's amendment process?
This is where the text challenges the very legitimacy of how the 17th Amendment was implemented, leaning heavily into Article V of the Constitution.
Let's look at the mechanics of Article V. It is the rule book for how to amend the Constitution. It requires 2/3 of Congress to propose an amendment and 3/4 of the states to ratify it.
Right.
But there is a specific, ironclad caveat written right into the very end of Article V.
Yes. It says that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate.
Now, the official doctrine, the accepted legal reality that every law student is taught today is that equal suffrage is just simple arithmetic. Every state gets 2 seats and every senator gets 1 vote. As long as Wyoming has 2 seats and California has 2 seats, equal suffrage is perfectly maintained.
But the author completely rejects that arithmetic view.
Completely.
The author's critique is that equal suffrage is not just about the number of chairs. It is about the mechanism of participation.
Yes.
In the original constitutional design, the state's participation was not just having 2 chairs in a room in Washington. It was the fact that the state legislature, as an institution, held the key to who actually sat in those chairs.
There is a really powerful line in the text that summarizes this perfectly. It says, equal suffrage cannot mean only 2 chairs if the Constitution also gave the state legislature the key to the chair.
I have to challenge this or ask you to clarify the mechanics here, because this is wild.
It is a huge claim.
Is the author actually saying the 17th Amendment is legally unconstitutional, even though it went through the formal ratification process? Can an amendment be unconstitutional?
The author is presenting a deep constitutional theory about what an amendment power actually is. They're arguing that Article V is an amending power, not a self-erasing power or a demolition clause.
Meaning, exactly, how do those differ mechanically?
Meaning you cannot use the procedural rules of a document to demolish the structural protections of that exact same document.
Okay, give me an analogy.
Imagine building a house with thick, load-bearing walls designed to keep the roof from collapsing during a storm. You have a rule in your homeowner's agreement that says you can renovate the house if everyone agrees. But the author is saying you cannot use the renovation rule to remove the load-bearing walls, replace them with tissue paper, and then claim you didn't fundamentally change the house just because the roof hasn't caved in yet.
The state legislature selecting the Senate was a load-bearing wall against mass market capture.
Precisely. And by removing that wall via the 17th Amendment, the system preserved the appearance of continuity. There are still 2 senators per state. The math is the same. But it removed the structural mechanism that defined the office and protected it from the campaign marketplace.
And we have to tie this massive, abstract constitutional theory all the way back down to the human being we started with an hour ago.
Yes, the person in the cell.
The impoverished defendant sitting in a local county jail cell, losing their job because they cannot pay a $500 bond.
That is the entire point of the text, bridging these 2 seemingly unrelated ideas. The laws that are crushing that defendant downstream, the mandatory minimums, the bail statutes, the extreme underfunding of public defenders, the habitual offender enhancements, those laws were written by a system that allowed its own architecture to be manipulated upstream.
Unequal lawmaking creates unequally protected people.
If the law itself is not structurally protected, if it can be bought by the campaign marketplace, if the load-bearing walls are removed, then the people on the ground cannot possibly be protected by that law. The inequality just flows downhill.
Wow. We have covered an incredible amount of ground today on this deep dive. Let's summarize the mechanics of this massive journey.
It is a lot to take in.
We started downstream in the muck of the local county courthouse. We looked at the argument that equal protection under the 14th Amendment has to be a whole machine reality. It's not just a public defender's signature on a plea form.
No, it is the cash bond amount that keeps the poor person in a cage while the rich person builds their defense from their living room.
It is the prosecutor legally using stacked charges to create terrifying sentencing cliffs.
It is the public defender carrying a mathematically impossible caseload.
It is the elected judge looking over their shoulder at the next attack ad.
And it is the weaponization of past records. Records often forged in that very same unequal machinery to compound punishment today.
And then we trace the origin of that machinery all the way up to the source code, the United States Constitution and the Senate.
We explored the deeply provocative idea that by passing the 17th Amendment, we removed a load-bearing wall.
We moved the gate of federal power into a campaign marketplace driven by money and mass persuasion. And if the law itself is captured by that marketplace upstream, true equal protection downstream is a mechanical impossibility.
It is a staggering critique of the entire vertical architecture of American power, from the holding cell to the Senate floor.
As we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with a final thought to ponder that really builds on everything we've unpacked today.
It is a heavy one.
We have talked extensively about environments today. We talked about how the physical environment of the local jail applies unbearable pressure that forces guilty pleas, and how the financial environment of the campaign marketplace applies unbearable pressure that forces political outcomes.
I think the most lingering, unsettling question this text leaves us with is a question of human agency.
Free will.
Exactly. If, as the author argues, the cage changes the case for the defendant downstream and the campaign changes the lawmaker upstream, where in the architecture of this government does genuine, unpressured free will actually exist?
That is the ultimate question. When we look at that broken X-ray of the justice system we talked about at the very beginning of the show, are we actually looking at a system that judges independent, free human actions?
Or is the system, from top to bottom, simply measuring the amount of pressure it has successfully applied to those human beings?
It is a question that forces us to look past the paperwork, look past the dockets, and look directly at the pressure. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep, complex journey today. We know this was a heavy one, demanding a lot of mechanical unpacking, but understanding how the machinery actually works is the very first step to figuring out what justice even means. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep looking past the paperwork, and we will see you on the next deep dive.